Imagine being handed the most important job of your life.
Okay.
The catch. You have absolutely no experience for it. You're a British lawyer in 1947.
Right.
You've never once set foot in India. And you've just been given a map, some census reports, and a deadline of only 5 weeks.
5 weeks for them.
Exactly. Your task: draw a line that will divide a subcontinent, creating 2 new nations for 450 million people.
Sounds impossible.
This was the actual job given to Sir Cyril Radcliffe. From an office thousands of miles away, his pen would slice through provinces like Punjab and Bengal, sometimes cutting directly through a village, a farm, or even a single house.
Based purely on religious demographics on a map he barely understood.
He drew a border for a country he didn't know, the line he created, kept secret until 2 days after independence was granted.
Which is just unbelievable timing.
When it was finally revealed, it triggered one of the greatest and most violent migrations in human history. How did a single line, drawn so hastily by an outsider, unleash a firestorm of violence that would kill potentially 1 million people and create a rivalry that still defines the region today?
That's the core question, isn't it?
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the 1947 India-Pakistan partition.
It's a huge topic.
Huge. Our mission is to dissect its origins, explore the profound sociocultural transformations it ignited,
The shifts in identity, the human cost.
analyze its enduring geopolitical ramifications, which are massive, and even investigate the historical feasibility of alternative decolonization models.
Could things have gone differently? It's a question that hangs over everything.
It's a complex history, no doubt, but one that continues to shape South Asia and, frankly, the world in ways many don't fully realize.
It's truly fascinating, how this one pivotal historical moment, the partition, continues to reverberate. You see it across regional stability.
Or instability, maybe?
Exactly. It shapes national identities, even now, decades later. And it influences the strategic interests of global powers.
You really can't understand modern South Asia without understanding 1947.
Precisely. Understanding this event isn't just about looking backward. It's crucial to comprehending the present-day dynamics of a region home to over 1.5 billion people.
Yeah.
It touches everything from trade routes to, well, counterterrorism efforts.
The seeds of division, how the line was drawn.
So, to begin, why did the British decide to partition India in the first place? It seems like such an immense decision, almost unthinkable. Our research points to something maybe surprisingly straightforward at its core. Was it about ideology or something more practical?
Well, at its heart, the primary driver was indeed practical. It was financial exhaustion. Simple as that, almost.
After World War II.
Exactly. After the monumental costs and economic devastation of the war, Britain was just depleted. They couldn't afford to maintain their vast empire anymore.
We were broke, essentially.
Pretty much. They'd borrowed heavily from the U.S., they had immense reconstruction needs back home, and the military and administrative costs of governing India were just unsustainable. The war had fundamentally weakened their imperial power.
So they were looking for a way out.
Desperately trying to cut their losses, this financial strain led them to declare their intention to grant independence. And critically, it led them to set an incredibly tight deadline.
August 15th, 1947, under Lord Louis Mountbatten, the last viceroy.
Right. And this urgency, this almost desperate rush to leave, fundamentally influenced every single decision that followed.
No time for careful planning.
None. Meticulous planning, careful transitions, consensus building. It was all sacrificed for speed, which, as we'll definitely get into, contributed significantly to the chaos and violence that ensued.
It sounds less like a planned decolonization.
And more like a frantic exit strategy under immense financial and political pressure. A scramble, really.
So it was a dash for the door rather than a thoughtful handover. And this quick exit meant that many underlying tensions were allowed to just boil over.
They didn't have the time, or perhaps the inclination, to manage them properly.
But some of those tensions, particularly those along religious lines, they weren't entirely organic, were they? What role did the British play in embedding religious divisions into Indian political life long before partition was even seriously on the table?
You've hit on a foundational element here, something that often gets overlooked in the rush to blame one side or the other.
Go on.
The British played a significant, arguably central role in formalizing and politicizing religious identity in India over decades. Historically, Indian society was incredibly diverse, yes.
Absolutely. So many faiths, communities, often intertwined.
But the British, for administrative purposes, and you could certainly argue, to serve their divide and rule strategy, began to categorize Indians primarily by religion.
How did they do that, practically speaking?
Well, for instance, they created separate voter lists for local elections, and later, through laws like the Government of India Act of 1909, the Morley-Minto reforms, they introduced separate electorates.
Separate electorates, meaning?
Meaning specific seats in legislative councils were reserved for Muslims, and only Muslims could vote for those representatives. Same for other groups later on.
Wow. So that's a radical departure from a common system.
Completely. It essentially forced people to identify themselves politically by their faith, rather than as citizens of a single entity.
So you're saying they built religion into the political structure itself?
Exactly. This administrative practice, whether it was intended or not, transformed religion into a central political factor. It conditioned people over generations to think in terms of distinct religious blocs: Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, and so on.
Each with its own separate political interests and its own slice of representation.
Right. Instead of fostering a broader, unified Indian identity, it segmented the population. Imagine how that shifts public consciousness.
So when independence finally comes onto the horizon,
this pre-existing political stratification, where religious identity was already tied to political representation, dramatically exacerbated tensions. The population was already primed, in a way, to see itself as competing political communities based on faith.
Okay, so this really set the stage for two very different, almost irreconcilable visions for the future of India, didn't it?
Absolutely. On one side, you had leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru.
Their vision was for a unified India, right? Inclusive, multi-religious.
Yes. Their ideal was what's called a composite nationalism, a vision where the nation's identity wasn't tied to one religion or ethnicity.
Built on shared citizenship instead.
Exactly. Built on the shared civic identity of all its diverse peoples. They imagined a strong, unified India where people of all faiths, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Jains, Buddhists, could coexist peacefully within a single, cohesive nation.
Were they alone in that view?
Oh no, many other influential voices echoed this. Figures like Allama Mashriqi, who led the Khaksar movement, argued very strongly against partition.
What was his argument?
He emphasized the centuries of peaceful coexistence between Muslims and Hindus. He saw that long history as proof that continued unity was not just possible, but essential.
He saw partition differently.
He saw partition as a colonial ploy, something that would only breed fundamentalism and serve the British agenda of divide and rule. Mashriqi famously said that all of Hindustan belonged to Indian Muslims, but not as a separate, divided state.
Strong words.
Very. He was quite critical of separatist leaders, viewing them as power-hungry and misleading Muslims to bolster their own power by serving the British. So there was significant opposition to partition from within both communities who genuinely believed in a united India.
But there was that powerful counter-argument.
Yeah.
The demand for a separate nation that ultimately won out.
Indeed. Spearheading this counter-argument was Muhammad Ali Jinnah,
leader of the All India Muslim League.
Right. A formidable figure, Jinnah articulated the two-nation theory,
which argued
essentially that Hindus and Muslims were two distinct nations, separate cultures, religions, ways of life, making it impossible, in his view, for them to live together peacefully in a single state.
So what was the core fear driving that?
His argument was that Indian Muslims feared marginalization, discrimination, and potential subjugation in a Hindu-majority state. He felt their distinct cultural and religious identity could only be protected by establishing a separate Muslim homeland.
Which would become Pakistan?
Exactly. And the inability of these two profoundly different visions, Gandhi and Nehru's unified India versus Jinnah's separate Muslim state, to find common ground, was critical. It felt insurmountable.
A political deadlock.
A deep one. And this deadlock, combined with the British desire for a swift, no-fuss departure, made partition, despite the obvious human cost. Well, it made it appear to be the quick and simple solution at the time.
Easier than trying to bridge the divide.
Certainly quicker for the British. The complexities of figuring out a power-sharing arrangement for a unified India just seemed too time-consuming, too politically exhausting for them. Division became the path of least immediate resistance for the departing colonizers.
So with the decision for partition made, the daunting, almost absurd task of drawing the actual boundary fell to Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer.
With absolutely no prior knowledge or experience of India, as you said.
And he had just 5 weeks. It's almost unbelievable given the stakes for millions. What were the specific challenges he faced, beyond the clock and his lack of local knowledge?
Well, that lack of knowledge and the deadline were huge, obviously, but this fact is just stunning and utterly central to the catastrophe that followed. He was a stranger to India
Arrived in July 1947.
and had until August 15th, just 36 days to literally draw the future of a subcontinent.
What did he even have to work with?
Outdated census reports from 1941, which were already flawed and didn't account for recent migrations or, the complexities on the ground.
And the maps?
Inadequate maps. Some apparently quite basic. His ground support was 2 boundary commissions, one for Punjab, one for Bengal.
Staffed by locals.
Each had 4 judges, 2 nominated by the Congress Party, 2 by the Muslim League. But they were so politically polarized they often couldn't agree on anything.
Leaving Radcliffe, too.
To make the final unilateral decisions from his office, based on flawed data.
So he was flying completely blind, essentially, just lines on a map.
Precisely. Relying on these flawed data points, roughly dividing the subcontinent into Hindu-majority areas and Muslim-majority regions.
But the reality on the ground was much messier.
Infinitely messier. What those abstract maps failed to show, and what Radcliffe had no firsthand experience of, was how deeply intermingled these communities were.
Villages with mixed populations.
Farms straddling the proposed lines, economic ties, social networks. The lives of millions were intricately woven across areas that were suddenly different countries.
His lines just sliced through them.
Often severing families from their ancestral land, cutting villages in half, sometimes even dividing individual homes. All based on abstract demographics.
Any particularly contentious examples?
Oh, absolutely. Consider the district of Gurdaspur in Punjab. It had a Muslim majority but was awarded to India.
Why was that so significant?
It was highly controversial because it provided India with a crucial land route to Kashmir, a territory that, as we know, would become the epicenter of future conflict. The arbitrariness, the lack of human consideration was immense.
And then the timing of the announcement.
To compound the disaster, yes, these incredibly consequential maps were kept secret until August 17th, 2 days after independence was declared on the 15th.
Why the secrecy?
Ostensibly to prevent immediate violence or challenges before the transfer of power. But the effect
Was catastrophic.
It prevented any preemptive adjustments, any orderly transition of populations, any time for communities or leaders to prepare. When the lines were finally revealed, chaos.
People woke up on the wrong side of a border they didn't even know existed.
Literally overnight, it unleashed an immediate, unplanned, and utterly chaotic mass migration.
The human deluge, sociocultural upheaval, and identity formation.
The immediate consequence of revealing the Radcliffe line was, as you said, this human catastrophe on an unimaginable scale.
A deluge, truly.
We're talking estimates of between 15 and maybe even 20 million people displaced, forced onto these perilous journeys, often hundreds of miles, to cross borders that hadn't existed days before. It sounds like a forced exodus.
It was precisely that, but overlaid with a horrific level of communal violence. This mass migration wasn't just people moving, it was often people fleeing for their lives amidst terrible brutality.
Was there a precursor to this level of violence?
Oh, yes. The Calcutta killings in 1946, sometimes called the Great Calcutta Killing, were a grim warning sign. An estimated 2,000 people, maybe more, died in just a few days of intense rioting between Hindus and Muslims. It showed how quickly tensions could explode.
So when the borders were announced,
That potential for violence became reality on a massive scale. Both the Muslim League and right-wing Hindu and Sikh groups had organized militias.
and they became active.
Very active. They engaged in expelling people from their homes, often using extreme violence to consolidate religious control in their respective areas. It created this brutal feedback loop of displacement, retaliation, attack, counterattack.
What did that look like on the ground?
In Punjab, which was sliced in two, it was horrific. Entire villages were set ablaze. Trains carrying refugees would arrive at their destinations filled with corpses, the infamous ghost trains. Wells were reportedly filled with the bodies of women who jumped in to avoid capture or dishonor.
The scale of the killing is hard to comprehend.
Estimates vary wildly, which tells its own story, but somewhere between 200,000 and perhaps up to 1 million people were killed. Or they died from disease, starvation, exhaustion, and the overflowing, unsanitary refugee camps that sprang up.
And beyond the killings,
There was the systematic targeting of women. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands from all communities were subjected to unspeakable acts: rape, kidnapping, mutilation, forced conversions, forced marriages. It was used as a weapon to terrorize and dishonor the other community. The human suffering was immense, pervasive, and deeply, deeply targeted.
So the lines on the map were literally drawn in blood. It's horrifying, and I imagine the impact of that, the trauma, continues to reverberate today.
Absolutely. It's not just history. It's lived experience passed down through generations. It shapes historical narratives, mistrust, identity on both sides of the border.
Is anything being done to address that trauma? To capture those stories?
Yes, thankfully. Initiatives like the 1947 Partition Archive are absolutely crucial here.
What do they do?
They are dedicated to collecting thousands of oral histories from survivors and their families, firsthand accounts of displacement, loss, violence, but also resilience and hope.
Trying to build a fuller picture.
Exactly. Their aim is to create a more comprehensive and human-centric narrative, one that goes beyond the often sanitized or politicized official state-sponsored versions of history.
Why is that so important?
The goal is really to facilitate healing and maybe even reconciliation. By acknowledging the personal stories, the individual losses, the shared trauma, it provides a space for it to be processed. And it ensures these vital human experiences are not lost to history. It grounds the abstract historical event in real human lives.
Connecting this enormous human tragedy to the bigger picture, how did this forced demographic shift and the accompanying violence fundamentally shape the evolving national identities of India, Pakistan, and later Bangladesh? It must have altered who they saw themselves as, right down to the core.
Oh, profoundly. The partition fundamentally altered the sociocultural fabric of the entire subcontinent. It left an indelible mark on national identities.
How so for Pakistan?
Well, for Pakistan, the outcome was a significantly more Islamized nation. This aligned with Jinnah's vision for a Muslim homeland. Before partition, the areas that became Pakistan had large non-Muslim minorities, and after. Today, Pakistan is overwhelmingly Muslim, over 96%. Less than 2% of the population is Hindu. That's a stark demographic shift directly resulting from partition. And this pursuit of an Islamic identity has shaped its legal system, its social norms, its politics.
And what about India? It was founded on secular principles.
Yes, leaders like Nehru were deeply committed to a secular, multi-religious state. But the partition, paradoxically, also fueled the rise of Hindu nationalism in India.
How did that happen?
Well, the creation of Pakistan as a Muslim state and the violence surrounding partition arguably solidified a sense of a Hindu majority in India for some. This has led to ongoing debates about India's secular identity and the rights and place of its large Muslim minority, which remain very contentious today.
And Bangladesh has its own unique story, doesn't it? Having experienced multiple partitions, how did that shape its identity?
Indeed. It's a really complex case. As scholar Anuttama Banerjee points out, Bengal didn't just experience partition in 1947.
There was an earlier one.
Yes, a controversial partition in 1905 by the British, primarily along administrative and arguably religious lines, which was later annulled due to protests. Then came 1947, when East Bengal became East Pakistan.
Separated from West Pakistan by over 1,000 miles of India.
Exactly, a geographical absurdity. That, combined with linguistic and cultural differences and feelings of economic and political exploitation by West Pakistan, led to a growing independence movement.
Culminating in 1971.
Right. A violent war of liberation, with Indian support, led to East Pakistan breaking away to become Bangladesh, a third nation carved out of the original British India.
So, this continuous experience of division.
It has deeply ingrained a sense of othering on all sides of the various borders between West Bengal and India and Bangladesh, between Bangladesh and Pakistan. It's shaped distinct national narratives. In Bangladesh, there's a strong emphasis on ethno-linguistic identity being Bengali, and it sometimes fuels new tensions even between India and Bangladesh, despite their shared Bengali heritage and India's role in its creation.
This raises a really important question. What about the people who didn't move? The ones who found themselves on the wrong side of the border, becoming minorities in these newly defined nations. Their experience must have been profoundly different.
Profoundly different, and often incredibly difficult. Their experience was, and in many ways continues to be, one of vulnerability and, at times, marginalization.
How so?
The partition, by its very nature, created powerful religious majorities in both India and Pakistan. This automatically left the remaining minorities, Hindus and Sikhs in Pakistan, Muslims in India feeling smaller, exposed, significantly more vulnerable. They effectively became the other in their own homelands overnight.
Is there a term for this effect?
Yes, the concept of the territorial trap, used by political geographer John Agnew, is really relevant here.
The territorial trap.
It highlights how the process of state formation, especially with these new fixed, impermeable borders, prioritized land the abstract territory over the actual people living on it.
So the focus was on defining the edges.
Exactly. It led to the creation of robust security apparatuses, armies, border guards, visa regimes, designed primarily to keep people out, to define and defend the new national boundaries, rather than focusing on integrating and protecting the diverse populations within those new borders.
And the impact on minorities.
For minorities, this often meant a loss of political power, fewer economic opportunities, and sometimes a constant struggle for basic rights, security, or cultural recognition. Their loyalty might be questioned, their security could feel precarious. This legacy of minority vulnerability, where their status, rights, and identity are often debated and sometimes challenged, continues to be a profound and sensitive issue across the region, affecting millions of lives even today.
The enduring shadow geopolitical ramifications.
Okay, so the partition didn't just cause immediate human suffering. It immediately set the stage for an enduring rivalry. And the most obvious example, the one that dominates the headlines even now, is Kashmir.
Kashmir, yes, the intractable dispute. It really is the bleeding wound of partition.
Can you quickly remind us how that dispute started?
Sure. At independence in 1947, the hundreds of princely states in India weren't directly ruled by the British. They were given a choice. A cede to India or a cede to Pakistan.
And Kashmir.
Kashmir was tricky. It had a Muslim majority population, but was ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh. He initially wanted independence, or at least delayed making a decision.
What forced his hand?
In October 1947, tribal militias, backed by elements in Pakistan, invaded Kashmir. Facing the collapse of his state, the Maharaja appealed to India for help and signed the Instrument of Accession, formally joining India.
And India intervened.
India sent in troops, Pakistan sent its own forces, and the first India-Pakistan War began right there in 1947-48. It ended with the ceasefire line, the line of control dividing Kashmir.
A line that's never been accepted as a permanent border.
Never. This unresolved conflict directly led to another full-blown war in 1965, and there have been major flashpoints since, like the 1999 Kargil crisis,
where Pakistani-backed infiltrators crossed the line of control into Indian-administered Kashmir.
Exactly. It brought the two nations dangerously close to another full-scale war, this time between two newly declared nuclear powers.
So both countries still claim the whole region?
Yes. Both India and Pakistan continue to claim the entirety of Kashmir, even while administering different parts of it. This core dispute also significantly factored into India's decision to intervene in the 1971 war.
Which led to Bangladesh's creation.
Right. Weakening Pakistan was certainly a strategic goal for India, partly linked to the Kashmir situation. So the Kashmir issue isn't just history. It's a living, breathing conflict that constantly threatens regional stability, consumes vast resources, fuels mistrust, and enables cross-border tensions.
And perhaps the most chilling legacy of this whole rivalry, as you just touched upon, is the nuclear dimension.
Absolutely chilling.
We're talking about two nuclear-armed nations, neighbors, locked in this perpetual conflict. How has that shaped the strategic landscape? It feels like a constant tightrope walk.
It is, and it raises truly unprecedented global concerns. As Al Jazeera and others point out, any full-blown war between India and Pakistan would be the first ever between two established nuclear-armed powers.
The potential consequences are staggering.
Astronomically high. Such a conflict could directly affect 1.6 billion people in the region, not to mention the potential for nuclear fallout, economic chaos, and even impacts on global climate.
How do they manage this risk? What are their nuclear doctrines?
Well, Pakistan, facing a conventionally larger Indian military, relies on nuclear weapons as a deterrent against conventional attack. They've outlined ambiguous red lines for a nuclear response.
What kind of red line?
Things like significant loss of territory, mass destruction of its military forces, economic strangulation through blockades, or major political destabilization caused by external factors.
But they're ambiguous.
Critically, yes. Pakistan has never explicitly defined how much territory needs to be lost, or how much destruction is required to trigger these red lines. The strategic ambiguity is intended to deter India by creating uncertainty.
But it carries risks.
Huge risks of miscalculation. One side might inadvertently cross an unstated threshold, triggering an unintended escalation.
And India's position.
India officially operates under a no first use (NFU) nuclear policy. They pledge not to use nuclear weapons unless first attacked with them.
Okay.
But they also reserve the right to massive retaliation if that NFU line is crossed by an adversary. So there's ambiguity there too. How massive is massive? Under what exact circumstances?
So it's a delicate balance.
Very delicate. As expert Laura Salmon highlights, this strategic ambiguity on both sides is a classic double-edged sword. It can restrain aggression by making the consequences uncertain, but it also significantly heightens the risk of accidental escalation because neither side fully understands the other's absolute breaking points.
Okay, beyond Kashmir and the nuclear standoff, how else does this shadow of partition manifest in the geopolitics today? Are there other long-term consequences we see playing out?
Oh, definitely. The partition effectively crippled the potential for regional cooperation in South Asia.
How so?
Look at SARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. It exists, but it's largely been ineffective, primarily because of the constant tensions and mistrust between its two largest members, India and Pakistan.
Which impacts everyone else in the region.
Hugely. It hampers economic development, trade integration, cultural exchange, everything that regional cooperation is supposed to foster. Consider water disputes, for example.
The Erd River systems.
Yes, the Indus Waters Treaty, brokered by the World Bank in 1960, managed water sharing reasonably well for decades. But with climate change affecting river flows and growing populations increasing demand, water is becoming a potential flashpoint again.
And the borders themselves.
The partition created long, often porous borders that have been difficult to manage and have been exploited by non-state actors. The rise of cross-border terrorism has become a persistent, tragic feature of the India-Pakistan relationship.
With groups based in one country launching attacks in the other.
Exactly. This constantly escalates tensions, leads to military skirmishes, and keeps the relationship hovering near the brink of conventional conflict, which, as we discussed, now carries that nuclear shadow.
And how do global powers fit into this picture? Do they try to mediate, or do they sometimes end up fueling the rivalry?
It's complex. Global powers are inextricably linked to the region's stability, or lack thereof. The United States, for decades, has tried to walk a tightrope, balancing relationships with both.
Pakistan as a counterterrorism ally, India as a strategic partner.
Broadly, yes. Pakistan was crucial during the Cold War and later in Afghanistan, while India has emerged as a major economic power and a key player in the U.S. strategy towards China. Balancing those relationships is tricky.
And
China has become a very close ally of Pakistan. They've invested billions in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, and are Pakistan's main supplier of advanced military equipment.
which obviously impacts the India-Pakistan military balance.
Significantly. It deepens Pakistan's strategic alignment with China and further complicates India's security calculations. Russia, traditionally closer to India, is also navigating this complex geopolitical landscape.
So external powers can sometimes help de-escalate.
They can offer channels for diplomacy, yes. The U.S. has played that role in past crises, but their involvement can also exacerbate the rivalry. Arms sales, economic aid, strategic partnerships. These inevitably shift the balance of power and force both India and Pakistan to constantly reassess their own defense postures and strategic red lines, potentially making the situation even more volatile.
The path not taken alternative decolonization models.
This intense, seemingly unending rivalry, the constant threat, it really leaves you wondering, could things have unfolded differently?
That's the great what-if of South Asian history.
Were there feasible alternative models for decolonization? Could partition have been avoided, or was it truly inevitable given the deep divisions we discussed?
Well, that's the crux of the debate, isn't it? And looking back, our research suggests that a unified India was a possibility, at least conceptually.
How might that over?
Perhaps structured as a loose federal system, something that could have accommodated Muslim-majority provinces or states within a larger, unified framework. Giving them significant autonomy might have addressed some of the fears about marginalization that Jinnah articulated.
Was there any precedent for that kind of structure?
Paradoxically, yes. The British themselves, throughout their long rule, had actually laid some groundwork for decentralized administration. It wasn't designed for a unified independent India, of course, but the structures existed and could potentially have provided a template.
If the political will had been there to use them differently.
Precisely. If the focus had shifted from imperial control to building a post-colonial federation.
What kind of groundwork are we talking about? How far back did these ideas of local governance go under the British?
They started experimenting quite early, really from the mid-19th century onwards. From around 1864, they established municipalities in urban areas and district boards in rural areas across India.
What were these bodies responsible for?
Initially, managing essential local services, education, public health, sanitation, water supply, things like that, funded through local taxes.
Why did the British do this? Was it purely altruistic?
Not really. Their motivations were mixed. It helped ease the financial burden of over-centralization on the imperial government. It allowed them to introduce European-style civic amenities, partly for their own benefit.
And politically.
Politically, it was also a way to respond to rising Indian nationalism. By providing some basic facilities and, crucially, involving some Indians in administration, they hoped to co-opt local elites and maintain overall British control. Appeasement, almost. There were key moments, too. Lord Mayo's resolution of 1870 was a significant step towards financial decentralization.
Giving provinces more control over their budgets.
Yes, giving provincial governments the power to raise some local revenue and control spending on departments like education and public works. The idea was to foster local interest in managing funds efficiently.
And then Lord Ripon. He's often mentioned in this context.
Yes, Lord Ripon, Viceroy from 1880 to 1884, is often called the father of local self-government in India. He really pushed for greater non-official Indian participation and the introduction of elective principles in these local bodies from 1882.
So, more elected Indians running local affairs.
That was the vision. He saw these urban and rural local bodies not just as administrative units, but as tools for public and political education. He wanted to minimize direct official interference, advocating for non-officials to form the majority and even chair these bodies where possible. So you can see the framework for a more decentralized, potentially federal, India seemed to be developing piece by piece over decades.
Okay, so a framework for decentralization existed, developed by the British themselves. There was some experience with it. But despite these initiatives and the potential they held, why didn't these models pave the way for a unified, multi-religious state? It feels like the pieces were there, but they never quite came together effectively.
That's the crucial question. The problem was that these local bodies, despite the progressive intentions of some reforms like Ripon's, faced significant structural and financial limitations. They were never truly empowered.
How were they limited?
Well, for one, elected members often remained a minority in these bodies, especially in the early days. This severely limited genuine local representation and decision-making power.
And who could vote?
The franchise, the right to vote, was highly restricted. Typically limited to wealthier, educated individuals, property owners, this excluded vast sections of the Indian population from participating politically at the local level.
So not really democratic.
Not in any modern sense. And crucially, British district officials often retained ultimate power. They could veto decisions, override the boards, or control the purse strings, undermining the whole principle of local self-governance. Even later reforms didn't fully fix this. The Government of India Act of 1919 introduced something called diarchy in the provinces. Local government became a transferred subject, theoretically under the control of Indian ministers responsible to provincial legislatures.
That sounds like progress.
It was, on paper. But finance remained a reserved subject, meaning the British governor and his executive council still held the real financial power. Indian ministers couldn't enact meaningful reforms or fund local initiatives without British approval.
So they had responsibility without real power.
Largely, yes. The Simon Commission, which reviewed the situation in 1928, was quite critical of the limited progress, especially in village panchayats councils. They noted that local bodies were often reluctant to impose local taxes and relied heavily on provincial grants, keeping them weak and dependent.
So the framework existed, but it was never given teeth.
Exactly. The political will, from both the British side to truly devolve power, and arguably from some Indian nationalist leaders who perhaps favored a strong center, wasn't strong enough to make decentralization the foundation for a unified state.
So it sounds like a complex web of factors. Weak structures, limited powers, restricted franchise, and ultimately divided political will that led away from unity and towards partition.
Precisely. While the Government of India Act of 1935 granted more provincial autonomy and nominally removed the strict division of financial powers, local bodies' ability to raise significant taxes remained limited. Central control, in various forms, still loomed large.
So the alternative path wasn't taken.
Ultimately, no. Despite these decades of precedent for decentralized governance and the potential for a loose federal structure, the dominant political forces pushed in other directions. Leaders like Gandhi and Nehru, while advocating unity, largely insisted on a relatively centralized state structure post-independence.
Which didn't reassure minority groups.
It failed to adequately address the deep-seated concerns articulated most forcefully by Jinnah, of Muslim minorities about their place in power within a Hindu-majority nation.
And the British role in the end.
That failure to find an internal consensus, coupled with the British haste to exit India, driven by their own post-war weakness and their own long history of administratively politicizing religion through things like separate electorates, all these factors converged. The path to a unified, multi-religious state was ultimately abandoned. Partition seemed, to those making the final decisions, the only workable, if tragic, way forward.
Great mistake.
As historians like Elaine Danielou argue, yes, a great mistake, not just politically, leading to instability, but profoundly on the human level. A burden, he called it, leaving deep scars and unresolved conflicts. Outro.
Wow. Our deep dive has taken us through the really complex origins, the absolutely devastating human cost, and the lasting, potent geopolitical impacts of the 1947 partition of India and Pakistan.
It really is a heavy history.
It's such a stark reminder, isn't it? How decisions made in moments of imperial retreat, under political pressure and tight deadlines, can unleash consequences that ripple for generations, shaping national identities, international relations, in profound and often tragic ways.
We've touched on how that hastily drawn Radcliffe line just cleaved communities apart, fueling mass migration, communal violence on an almost unimaginable scale, leaving millions displaced, countless lives shattered.
And we've dissected the enduring rivalry it created, now intensified by nuclear arsenals, the constant threat of escalation, the persistent issue of cross-border terrorism. It continues to define the region's precarious balance today. But what's also fascinating and maybe hopeful in a way is that historical debate around the path not taken.
Right. Could a decentralized federal structure have worked? Could a more inclusive vision of Swaraj self-rule have offered an alternative to the bloody division? You know, the fact that leaders like Mahatma Gandhi explicitly envisioned a Swaraj where religious identity was purely personal, something that had absolutely no place in politics.
Where everyone would live as one man.
Exactly. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, everyone. That vision speaks to the profound chasm between that aspiration and the ultimate reality of partition. He even fasted nearly to death to prevent separate electorates for the so-called depressed classes, or Dalits.
Why?
Because he feared it would vivisect Hinduism, further dividing society. He acknowledged that true unity demanded immense sacrifice, even giving up one's life. He firmly believed that if Hindus and Muslims truly wanted to live in peace, no third party could separate them.
Implying if they allowed themselves to be divided.
It would be their own folly, their own failure to blame. A powerful and perhaps challenging perspective.
It really leaves you wondering.
Yeah, it does. Considering that multiple voices, powerful voices like Gandhi's, passionately argued against dividing India along religious lines. And given that these British administrative models for decentralization, however flawed, actually existed, what specific actionable political choices or compromises, beyond just good intentions or grand visions, could have genuinely fostered a unified, multi-religious subcontinent? What might have actually prevented that firestorm of violence that followed partition? It's a question worth pondering.